being the DNC vice chair, the Neutrality agreement. Just curious to know, why didn't you sign it in the beginning?
So, in the run for vice chair, just so people have context of how all this works, because the DNC for a lot of people is this kind of mysterious organization that they don't fully understand how it works, and that's understandable. It's a little confusing, to be honest with you. But there's about 450 DNC members that are elected from around the country and from our states and territories, and partner organizations that help to elect people like the vice chair positions, the treasurer, the chair, etc. And in this run, you obviously have to get a majority of the votes and everything. I repeatedly talked about how my organization, the work that we do, is supporting young Democrats in primaries and for state legislature and Congress and in general elections to help get Democrats into the majority for state legislatures and Congress. And what happened is after the election, there is now a proposed rule change where they gave us a neutrality agreement to sign where they said, okay, now that you've been elected, we want all of you to sign this agreement. And I said, well, my organization, my literal job is helping to elect young Democrats to state legislatures and Congress. The vice chair role is not a paid role. This is an entirely volunteer role, right? It is a labor of love. And my job is literally helping elect these younger people. And I said, I can't sign this because that is my job. I am involved in primaries, and I talked about that during my run for vice chair. And I'm not going to sign something that I can't abide by because you decided to change the rules after the election, right? I ran on this and was elected to this position while doing this work. So the reason why I didn't sign it is because this is my job, and people knew that as I was running. And what they're trying to do right now is change the bylaws of the DNC so that because currently I am not actually breaking any of the rules. There have been vice chairs before that have involved in primaries, that even had their own PACs that were involved in primaries as well. And what they're trying to do is change the rules so that I am in violation of them and therefore can be removed.
All right, so a story came out with Political saying that DNC Chair Ken Martin is going to give you an ultimatum to sign this agreement. If you have to sign it, will you resign from your position?
Like I'm in conversations right now with the DNC, obviously. And I'm trying to figure out what we can make work here because I think the fact of the matter is far too many members of Congress are failing to meet this moment, especially Democrats, to stand up and be a true opposition party to Donald Trump. And look, this goes beyond age. Unfortunately, it's not like you just get above a certain age and then you suck at your job, right? There are people of all ages who suck. It's not as simple as just saying if you're above a certain age, you shouldn't be there. What we're trying to do is it's not about being out with the old and in with the new. It's about being out with the ineffective and in with the effective and making sure that we're supporting candidates who are running in critical frontline districts to help Democrats get the majority at the same time. So we're having conversations about that as we speak.
Reese, you have a question?
Yeah. So my question for you is the idea of kind of bringing in fresh blood. We've seen so many examples. Actually, even most recently, Chokwe Lumba, who's the mayor of Jackson, he was just primaried, and a 70-year-old Black man beat him. We see repeatedly the staying power of older electeds. Dianne Feinstein beat out a crowded field and all kinds of people, and so Senator Dianne Feinstein. So it's more to it, obviously, than just putting forward somebody younger. There's a
Yeah.
disconnect between the narrative that the party is too old and you have all these older people that are taking up space and the actual votes that are cast. So what is your
Right.
plan to get the votes cast as opposed to just having these challenges that go nowhere, and now we have this infighting within the party as opposed to our focus on the Republicans?
Look, I think it's possible for us to do both at the same time. I think right now, like I said, far too many members of Congress are failing to meet the moment. Certainly some are standing up and fighting back for sure. And it's not to say that just any older member needs to go by any means. What I would say that we're trying to do here is give voters an option, right? Ultimately, Leaders We Deserve is not deciding these elections. What we're doing is helping get people on the ballot where we feel like they're needed, where we can get not just any young person. Like I said, there's younger people who aren't great either. We're here to support younger people who can be generational leaders and truly incredible representatives at the same time. And luckily, we're also seeing some movement as well. We saw, Dick Durbin announce his retirement just yesterday. I know a lot of our members, if they are older or they aren't able to meet the moment, will have the maturity if they are unable to meet it to step aside and ensure that they are training up that next generation. But what I would say that we're doing right here in order to get those votes is it's not so much saying, oh, we know if we endorse somebody, they're automatically going to win. If it's an older person that wins in that primary and the voters believe that is their best representative, so be it. Like I said, there are great older people in our party too that we do need that are leaders. People, I would argue, like Jim Clyburn, for example. We have people as well like Nancy Pelosi and others that I know if they reach the moment where they feel like they're unable to continue to serve in the best way possible, that they'll make the mature decision and step aside and help train up that next generation. What we're trying to do here is just give voters the option in our safer seats so that we don't risk losing the House, but we productively handle the kind of soul searching that our party is doing right now and give our young people a chance. Because I think diversity, of course, in Congress is very important. One thing we don't talk a lot about in that regard, though, is the diversity of age. Currently in Congress, if we had the same number of, just proportionally speaking, 25 to 30-year-olds elected in Congress as there are in the general population as a proportion, we would have over 40 members of Congress that are under the age of 30. And right now, we only have one. And that's Maxwell Alejandro Frost, the first member of Congress that my organization was built off a model of supporting, because he worked at March for Our Lives, the organization we started after Parkland. And after his election and supporting him and seeing how challenging it was, Maxwell had to Uber drive from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. every single night while he was running for Congress.
While the economy is important, and Reese and I were just having a conversation about it before you came on, Democrats have to figure out how to combat hate messaging, how to combat Southern Strategy 2.0 messaging. They've been doing this, Republicans, since the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed. And I've interviewed so many Democrats on this show, and they don't know. Kamala Harris didn't know how to do it. Trans, immigrants, DEI. It is their Willie Horton ad, welfare queen narrative, and they win elections on it, even when Democrats have a good economy. So Tell me, from your perspective, as the DNC vice chair, how are y'all going to combat hate messaging that especially appeals to young white men? It appeals to poor whites. It appeals to rural white voters. And you see some black folks falling for it too. How can y'all combat hate messaging?
I think what it doesn't look like is what some people are advocating for, which I would say is throwing, for example, marginalized groups like trans people under the bus and saying we can't talk about that. That's ridiculous, right? We are getting senselessly attacked for it all the time. I think what we need to say is, look, the role of the government should not be dictating who can and cannot play sports. That's weird. That doesn't make sense to me, because we have so many things that we need to be focused on that is not a role that our government should be playing in the first place. It's very weird to say, to a child that you can and cannot play. That is not, in my view, the role of the state. That's just not the role that we should be playing. I think the other thing that we need to be talking about is why did that message that Kamala Harris had, why did the message that Kamala Harris was so relentlessly attacked with of she's for, they, them, and I'm for you work? Yeah. I think part of the reason for that is because when people ask me why we lost the election, I say two things predominantly. One, we heard from people that the president was too old, and we heard that prices were too high. And we told them, with $2 billion behind us, no, he's not, then yes, he is. And then we said, no, they aren't. Look at this graph of the GDP, or look at this graph of the stock market, instead of saying, yes, prices are too high, but let's talk about the fact that we just lived through one of the largest economic disruptions since the Great Depression, and we managed to not have an incredibly high unemployment rate, and we understand prices are too high. They absolutely are. Here's what we're doing to actually address that, right? But I think when people feel so unheard, it's hateful messages that start to fill a lot of that. But I don't think the answer is to run away and say, oh, we just can't talk about this. We need to be fighters in the Democratic Party. We need to go on the offense. And when it comes to, for example, When it comes to attacks against DEI, we need to be talking about the fact of what are they really talking about here, right? Because it is a repeal of the Civil Rights Act that they are getting at. What they want us to believe is that somebody, because of the color of their skin or gender, cannot be a pilot, because the implication that they're saying over and over again is that, oh, they're lowering standards in order to meet this quota. That's not happening. And we need to do a much better job of fighting back against that and calling it out for what it is, which is racist. Because you're saying that people can't even have the opportunity to do these things in the first place.